Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you joined us today for the launch of the Prototype Learn and Work Ecosystem Library. We're very fortunate to have a longtime education journalist lead today's discussion because today is all about information. Liz Willen has served for 12 years as editor-in-chief of the Hechinger Report, a nonprofit newsroom that covers issues of inequality and innovation in education from the earliest years through college and careers. That's pretty much the full footprint of our lives. So Liz, we're turning the Zoom gavel over to you to share some thoughts about the information challenges ahead.
Thank you so much, Holly. I'm really excited to be here. I love moderating and participating in discussions about education because I learn so much. I'm also a huge fan and consumer of any kind of discussions that make these issues more clear and relevant and accessible, and that help us steer us away from cutting through the dense and complicated language that often tangles us up when we're talking about education issues. Much of the conversation here is focused on students that are non-traditional, like students who might not be at the four-year colleges, students who are trying to get jobs again, who might be in community colleges, might be working adults, and who might have who need a place in many times to get all of the information that's available to us so many places. There might be adult workers or learners who have some post-secondary credit but never got a degree. So this is a fascinating population to work with. We don't hear a lot about them. And I would like to start by thanking all of you who are here to help us make sense and get a vision of a place where we could get better information for this population and for everyone who's trying to understand issues about the intersection of the workforce and education. And I've been kind of overwhelmed in my years at the Hechinger Report about the challenges of writing about this population and all of these different workforce issues that are not really covered by the media very deeply. It's kind of no one's beat, but it really is for us, and how the higher education workforce is changing and the needs of the workforce are a really important part of our job. And it's why I really welcome being part of the discussion about this first year ever open use wiki library for the Learn and Learn ecosystem. That is a mouthful to say. I've often heard that term work and learn and earn, along with many others. So thanks to all of you who are working on this for coming up with sort of a one-stop shopping gathering place that's going to be so useful to those who are looking for us to understand these different needs and trends in higher education. And I just got back from a week of conversations around these issues at the CALE conference in Chicago that touched on many of the new issues that are in this new wiki. And I think it's a world that a lot of journalists don't understand, possibly because they don't know where the information is coming from. We're kind of inundated. And some, at the same time, employers are in desperate needs in many cases, we found in our reporting, to find skilled workers. And it appears that there's a scattering of programs from community colleges to employer training programs to nonprofit schools to for-profit schools, offering a range of skills and credentials. And it's hard for all of us to kind of get all of this in one place. And so that's why we're kind of appreciating this idea of having a streamlined one-stop shopping for this information, especially since we don't know what's going to be happening with Twitter. Kind of like a bookmark place where we can see it collected and curated. I've been playing around with this library all morning, and I already see how valuable it is. It's created with 4 main sections. You're going to hear a lot about it. You can put in what kind of a stakeholder you are. The library will suggest places for you to go. And Holly, in preparing for this session today, shared a cartoon drawing developed to try and explain the purpose of the Learn and Work ecosystem library. The cartoon shows a person standing in the middle of an innovation garden where many flowers are growing. The flowers' names include eTPLs, micro-credentials, non-credit bridges, blockchain, A1 resume screener, competency frameworks, digital badges, short-term Pell, skill-based hiring, embedded certifications, and platforms. The person in the next frame asks, where can she go to learn all about these innovations and these trends in the garden? And of course, the cartoon suggests the Learn and Work ecosystem library. And I'm fine with that because especially while we want definitions for all of these things, we won't always use them. As journalists, we sometimes joke about these terms only because it's our job to make the conversations accessible. And often I say to someone when I'm editing opinion pieces, of which I get about 10 a day, to think about what they are trying to say it conversationally. Tell it to me as if we were talking over a beer or a cup of coffee, and speak plainly, which truthfully means I would not be bringing up words like stackable credentials or competency frameworks in a discussion. But it also means that there's a place to go when someone throws around terms like Caro digital interoperability or CataFops micro-credentials, and where I can see that defined. So I'm going to urge all of you to take a look at this and use this opportunity to push once again for clarity in all of these discussions about improving the workforce. Because if we don't know how to talk about it plainly and clearly, and we don't have the language for it and the resources for it, all of those who are working to improve education won't be able to do the job as well as I know you all want to be able to do it. So I'm going to turn you back to Holly now, and she'll tell you a little bit more. Holly, and then I'm going to go on to asking some questions from these panels to help us put it all into perspective. Oops, Holly just muted.
I have to unmute all the rules of technology that run our lives. Well, our Learn and Work ecosystem, the formal and the informal learning and work system, and actually everything in between that supports the ecosystem, has really been rapidly changing. We wish we would be better connected. We wish we'd have a system that we could easily explain to learners to help them navigate our complex system. The vision of the library you're going to hear more about is to help with better information. We're here today to show you what we've built and see what you think. We have a short movie trailer to show you about the prototype library and its features. So now it's movie time.
Over the past decade, hundreds of initiatives have been launched to improve the nation's rapidly changing learn and work ecosystem. This has created a highly decentralized, often disconnected system that many of us struggle to understand. Today's system lacks an organized source of information. Where do we go to answer our questions? Often, we turn to our informal networks. At the exact point when problem solving is needed, work is slowed due to the ways we have to find information. People new to the work often have no idea who to call or where to find what they're looking for. In a time abundant with technology, there is no convenient library of linked information that is historical, recent, complete, and curated. The Learn and Work Ecosystem Library is here to help with these issues. The library is based on a wiki model of organization. To create alignment among the many areas of the ecosystem, the library contains 4 main sections. The knowledge section, which includes the key components and the many subcomponents of the ecosystem. Initiatives, the key projects that are working to improve the Learn and Work ecosystem. Alliances and intermediaries, a list of organizations that are focused on components of the ecosystem. An archive of historical documents and websites that still have valuable information, especially for researchers. The library website has numerous sorting and organizing options. Let's say that you would like to take a look at initiatives currently working to improve the career navigation component of the ecosystem. All you need to do is click the Initiatives block for career navigation to see the projects underway and sort and filter the results using the top checkbox options. Another intuitive feature of the library is a dynamic search function. This allows users to begin typing into the search box, and suggested content, pages, and resources will be populated. The ability to feature and organize content within the suggested box will be available to the library. The system will also log all searches, so over time, the library will be able to suggest the most popular searches to future users. The library also has many interconnected resources and gives the user automated links to more information. For example, if you were to see the word credentialing anywhere on the website, the library will lead you to the credential subcomponent page. To make it easier to search the growing body of information at the library, users will be able to identify what type of stakeholder they are, like a policymaker, an employer, or a credential provider. The library will suggest content that may be of particular interest to specific stakeholder groups. Throughout the site, you have ample opportunity to identify information to add or revise. You can request an edit to any entry. Simply fill in your first and last name, your email address, and what needs to be edited. The library staff will review the entries and make necessary corrections. Now that you know a little more about how the Learn and Work Ecosystem Library works, it's time to turn to you. We are eager to hear your thoughts. We ask that you navigate through it and let us know what you would like to see added or changed. We need you to help us build a library that works for the many diverse stakeholders seeking information.
Well, that helped explain it. And I know that there are many of you here who might have questions. And I just want to say that while we do have a chat function here, in this webinar, we're not going to have time to take questions from anybody who's listening, because we're going to be turning right to this fantastic panel to get some of their feedback and then some thoughts about this. They represent everyone from the journalists, the employer world, state policy world. They work with community colleges, universities, research foundations, etc. Everyone's title is in the box, but I'm going to say it each time I ask the question. And I'm going to be asking 2 questions. I'm apologizing in advance because we don't have the time to really think about it, to hear very, very long responses, but we definitely would like to hear from you about, since you're all major consumers of information. And I'm going to turn first on this one to Sean Gallagher at Northeastern University to ask, where are your main sources of information coming from now? Are they adequate? And do you think this library would help you and your audiences with the information needs? And tell us a little bit more about what ways. So I'm going to start with Sean.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, I find this very exciting. I think it's important to note that it has this wiki model, and it's a community-based effort. The video ended with "We need you," and so the opportunity to keep this up to date and to have a central resource for all kinds of groups. So often, being a researcher at Northeastern University, I play in the research space, but a lot of my work is with and for practitioners. So I'm thinking in particular, if you're a dean, a program director, an instructional designer, a faculty member, an employer, or someone else who's interested in these topics, there's a place we can now go. And also as someone who publishes research, along with many of my colleagues here, the idea that there's something permanent where this stuff can live and you can go and have something that's curated, I think will be very valuable. Because if you take just about any use case, whether it's finding some best practice, consuming the latest research, looking at policy developments, there's probably 10 or 20 things we could name. You really need to do something bespoke as a user, whatever audience you represent. It's like you have to do some custom research, and now hopefully this will help accelerate that process.
That's great. And I'm going to turn next to Paul Fain. And I apologize for the remarks about journalists not covering these issues, because it really does. We were on a panel together last week in Chicago, and we talked a lot about that. And his newsletter is, for me, a big source of where I get information. But I don't know where you get yours, Paul, because I know you do a lot of reporting, but I'd love your thoughts on what this library will mean for people who are looking for this type of curated info.
Thanks, Liz, and good to see you all. I have to say you're right. I took no offense. As a journalist, these issues aren't being covered very much at all. And for me, it's really hard to access the information that I need to do what I do. And frankly, I use a form of snowball research pretty much. I hear from sources and I ask about other sources and I kind of go from there. It's very informal. And frankly, oftentimes the best pieces I've written have come from somebody just reaching out to me on LinkedIn. And it's been stunning to me that, you know, some of these players I've never heard about. I can't really find much on the internet about, and they oftentimes are some of the ones that actually have scale in this space. I'll give you a specific example. I write a lot about skills training boot camps. And until I talked with Dr. Angela Jackson, an impact investor who's an expert in this space, I had never heard of Bitwise Industries, which, you know, serves 10,000 students in a bunch of cities and is just a fascinating model. So I feel like a lot of these important players are kind of falling through the cracks. And another thing I like about this is its neutrality. You know, these are not, this isn't going to be an advocacy piece where people are selling their products, and there's nothing wrong with that. But to me, I love this curation model to get the most accurate portrayal of what's happening out there. And then the last thing I'll say is I love the connections piece. You know, this network, this ecosystem is very complex. And even as a journalist who is very much a layperson, I get asked a lot for references to other folks in the space, because I think it's moving so fast. Journalists have a pretty valuable role right now because research and experts haven't caught up to what's happening. And I really hope that this library helps on that front.
Yes, that's a great points. Thank you, Paul. And I'm going to turn next to Edward Leach from NISOD. Hope I said that correctly. For your thoughts on this and how it would be useful in your world. Edward?
Yeah, thank you. You did pronounce it correctly, NISOD. And I'm pleased to be part of this panel. As far as where I get my information, we're fortunate in that we have a number of member colleges, and those colleges are routinely writing articles for our publications. They're making presentations at our conferences. So that's certainly one source of information, is from our member colleges, who all of them are in one way or another are in this space, trying to help their students become ready for employment, you know, quicker and at a lower cost than maybe it has been the case in the past. In addition, newsletters are a great source. Evolution does a great when it comes out periodically. Inside Higher Ed oftentimes has articles regarding this particular matter. And we've been fortunate to also have been asked as an organization to participate in a number of different projects related to this topic. Unmuddle comes to mind. I was banging around in the library the last couple of days and saw that you had Unmuddle there as one of the initiatives that are highlighted, and the other projects that we've been invited to participate in. So we're thrilled to be able to be a part of those different initiatives, and hopefully we can play a part in getting the word out about this particular effort, because I think in order for it to be successful, like the video said, we need you to be a part of this. Well, this effort's going to have to get the word out to as many players as possible, that this is available, and to get them to collaborate in this space. So we love to be a part of that effort in the dissemination about this as well.
Thank you, Edward. I'm going to turn to Janet Salm from Strata, which has done a great deal of work on this, constantly doing webinars and reports that I'm reading. It's one place where it's actually one of my go-to places for getting this sort of information. So they've obviously taken it many steps further, Janet. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts.
Great. Hi, everybody. Janet from Strata, where we're really trying to enable the building of a fairer learn and work ecosystem that really better connects people with the education and training they need to get the jobs they want. And so we have, you know, I am often wearing a researcher hat, so this will be clearly very helpful in the research world. As a funder, this would be also just really an important piece of infrastructure. And I also love that, you know, this is one of Holly Zanville's labors of love, that it's collecting the things that have come before, where we can all be smarter together around those things. So to me, this will be very helpful for thinking about for funders specifically, how to know which are the good organizations working on this, which are maybe some new organizations working on this issue. And to me, it's an issue of transparency. So like younger researchers or people new to the field of funding or strategic investing, venture investing, can quickly see what it often takes somebody who's been in the field for a long time to see those connections. And if somebody is a new innovator in the space too, they can quickly come up to speed on what's happened before and maybe learn from the best practices. I would just say, I would also emphasize, like Sean, that it's only as good as the community that comes in and works on it. So like it is an open invitation that while this is a beautifully done beginning to this community, it will only be as good as people add to it. So I love that when I look, Unmuddle's in there, but Paul, Bitwise Industries isn't in there yet. Like, okay, now we've already identified here is a submission to the ecosystem library that needs to happen. That's the kind of active participation we're all looking for here.
Great. Yes, a lot of audience participation and updating would be needed. Julie Uranus from do you pronounce it UPECA or UPCEA?
It's UPCEA or UPCEA. Either one will answer to both. Thank you, Liz. It's a privilege and an honor to be with everyone today. I think to answer your question about the main sources of information, we're lucky within our association. We have the wonderful Ray Schroeder, who curates a credential new blog for us, where he cites so many of the things that Paul's reporting on and kind of curates that information for us and our members. So that's a really good resource for us. I, like Edward, have got my reading list every morning of the Chronicle, IHE, and so many different newsletters, inclusive of your report when that's out. But what's key to that work and actually doing all of having all that reading and opportunity to engage at your fingertips is then the onus is on us as professionals to try and organize that information in a way that we can return to it when we need it, right? And so some of us are trying to curate like huge Zotero libraries, right? And the challenge often is that we are then forced to curate and read through everything on our own when we may not know the most about that information, those topics, to know really how do we situate that and how do we put that all within context. And so that's what's really great about this library, is having that opportunity around that curation. I would say, Sean, your points about curation and, really thinking through, well, what's an opinion piece and what's empirical research and how do I use that and how can I share that broadly with my communities? And to have a place where I can go and say, go here, it's open access. It's not hidden behind a publisher, paywall or anything like that. It really gives us an opportunity to disseminate information in ways that, may privilege different institutions, different organizations, simply because they have the funds to be able to afford all those various databases. So this kind of democratizes the work that's being done and allows us to disseminate it in new ways.
Great. Thank you so much, Julie. Next up, we're going to talk to Kenyatta Lovett. We'll hear from Educate Texas.
And thank you for having me, and agree with all of the panelists and the great value that this this resource will bring. I'm looking at it more from the lens of working with communities and regions and states, and them understanding that this is an ecosystem and a continuum that involves multiple different aspects of whether it's K through 12, higher education, workforce development. And so I typically have been pulling from different disciplines out there, whether it's economics or public administration or social sciences, but it's all in my brain. And I try my best to sort of disseminate that to stakeholders and leaders in a way that they can understand it. But now there's a resource where everyone can kind of see where they fit in this continuum, this credential to career conversation that we're having, which is good for one, onboarding. It's also good too for really helping people to understand their work is connected to a much larger conversation, but it fits nicely within this wiki that's being built. And I'd say, having this centralized resource, I don't know that I have much to add about keeping it going. I'm just glad for those who are contributing to keep doing so. I'll try to do my best, but I think more importantly, whether it's onboarding board members, whether it's bringing in employers to understand it in a more succinct way, this is helping to break down the silos that have been longstanding in the work, where people think that their part of the work has nothing connected to something else. And you can clearly see it here that this is part of a much larger ecosystem that's necessary when we talk about economic mobility.
Thank you so much. It is so rare for me to be moderating a panel where everyone agrees, and there seems to be enormous enthusiasm for this project here. I've heard very few critiques, but I'm interested if anybody has them, because I think that the groups here really want this to be better and as useful as possible. So feedback like that is going to also be important and appreciated down the line. But I know that there's enormous enthusiasm just for having it all in one place. We're going to hear next from William Turner Jr. of the Markle Foundation.
Sure. I don't know if you're setting me up to be the first person to have a concern, but I don't have a concern at this time about
You
this.
don't have to.
So I will just follow up what Kenyatta just mentioned. So the Markle Foundation, we're a private foundation that actually focuses on initiatives. And one of the initiatives we started out with about 5 years ago was Skillful, which is a part of this library as well. But we've actually gone bigger to where we've launched the Rework America Alliance. In that alliance, it's all about bringing like-minded folks together to work on the issue around skills-based practices, skills-based hiring, et cetera, and training. And so that alliance is very similar to what you're creating with this library. But one of the other things that we do as we look for places where we find our information from, we try to find out where are the barriers that are keeping certain people out of certain jobs, whether it's education, whether it's the employers don't understand how to hire based on skills, or career navigators. So we use a lot of our current alliance partners, such as McKinsey, the Atlanta Fed, getting their information. Strata has been a great help with us as well, and we read their reports, but it's about finding out what's out there, right? And so then we have to try to translate that into a way that we can share it with other people. This library is a way that, we can direct people to the library, whether it's an employer that doesn't understand skills-based practices or the research behind it, send them to this, or if it's a career navigator, be able to send them to the wiki and have them look at the resources and tools provided. So to me, it's really about it's a big task. Looking at what you've created so far is huge because of the number of researchers and folks that are working in this space that are out there, bringing them together. What I really like about it as well is that librarian piece of it, of somebody, lack of a better word, managing it and making sure that, and the ability for me as a consumer to go in and provide, edits or suggestions as well. That's different. I haven't seen it other places where you have somebody managing it. That's usually the part that's the hardest, is that it gets there and it becomes stagnant and you're not updating it. So it becomes, people obsolete, people don't want to use it. So I really like the way you're headed, where this is headed. I'm looking forward to a way that we as an alliance can share it within our network and share it within the folks and the employers and the career navigators that we work with, to help them help their folks get on that career pathway, whether it's with credential, with associate's degree, whether it's with a bachelor's degree, whatever it is, help them move down that path. And now we have another source that we can use to share with those folks to get to help the people we're trying to help.
That's great. And now we have David Lesser from IBM, who gets to be the last person to answer this question before we move on to the next round.
I disagree with everything everybody said. I just want to do that for you, Liz. No, it's interesting. I get my information from a lot of different sources, but mainly 3 different sources: through Google Safe searches, through industry relationships, LinkedIn, and then also, at IBM, we have a really good library of analyst groups. So I can rely on a lot of that stuff. But I'll tell you, when I was developing the IBM Digital Badge Program, none of that helped me at all because we were early to the game on it. And in order to create a program like the Digital Badge Program, you have to develop it and you have to sell it. And developing it, there was no roadmap on how to develop it. So we had to learn that. This library provides that, those best practices for developing it. But I think also the selling is always underestimated, how important it is to sell a program. And I know, again, from my personal experience, I had to sell very hard to get this paradigm shift in place. I had to sell the emotional side of it. This is going to help people, and these are the stories that will show you what it's going to do. And then I had to sell the rational side of it. This is the business benefit it's going to have. So I think this library is going to really help accelerate the adoption of a lot of these different ideas, but it's going to help people sell them as well.
Great. So that's fantastic hearing the first round. And then I have another question for everybody, and I'm going to try to go back into the same order I just did. And that was, the next one is, we're going to ask you to think about this wiki library, this concept that you've now been introduced a lot more to. Do you think a community engaged wiki can take hold in this ecosystem that we all share? And what are the biggest challenges ahead that you all see beyond what you all talked about, which is everybody using it and updating it? But I'd love to hear more. Let's start with you again, Sean Gallagher from Northeastern University.
Thanks. I don't have a tremendous amount of experience in wiki models myself, but it strikes me that students, graduate students, other students, if you think about a whole host of players and individuals that might be interested in this and might be in a place in their career or their studies, including researchers and professionals where they're trying to build their knowledge, they can contribute to that. And that's my sense of how sites like Wikipedia work, where it's people that are interested and invested in that topic. And maybe as they do their own research or reflect on their own interests, they can become a contributor, and it gets stickier over time. And I'll defer to others in terms of some of the lessons with those types of models in this sector, but those are some initial thoughts.
Great. Paul?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think broad participation is going to be key to making this work, and that's tricky. I really want to echo what Dr. Lovett said. I think the regional focus here, the ability to be regionally focused is huge. I mean, I'm in Washington, so we know how that goes. Not all things actually really do center on Washington and DC's perspective on things. So that's important, particularly in this work. But to me, like, it can cut both ways. Are all the silos here really going to participate? And, I feel like, having come from a higher ed journalism background to this, these worlds don't talk very well. You're really going to need big business and small business participation here to make this interesting. And that's going to be tough. And then the last piece is, these issues are so overwhelming, so complex. The scale, getting your arms around this is going to be really hard. But I really like the start that you all have taken here.
Well, kind of that's part of our job, Paul, right? To take these complex issues and help people understand them more. But I'm hoping that this is something that you all will hear and appreciate as well, because there are terms here that are confounding and that people have never heard before. And I just love that we can find them all in one place now. Edward, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you. It's been said several times, but I think it's worth repeating. The number of people, the number of entities, the more participation you can get in this effort, the stronger, the better it's going to be. By having a bunch of people participate in this, I think there's also the risk of things becoming disjointed. If the administrator isn't doing a great job of keeping things organized and there's some sense of organization to all the information that could be coming in from a variety of different sources. It could be unwieldy to try to find information. So while it's a great advantage to have a lot of input, it could also be a disadvantage at the same time. I think that's about it. As far as getting the word out, hint Holly and Lucia. NISOD has a variety of different strategies available for that through our conferences, our webinars, our publications, and so forth. So I would strongly encourage you to consider using us as a vehicle to help get the word out, not only to our member colleges, but beyond that population as well.
Great. Janet of Strata.
Yes, I mean, I think about one of the challenges being around getting people to participate will be trust. So you need to be able to trust that this is a place where you want your stuff to live. And an example of that is when you look at the site over on Alliances, which pops up a bunch of different places. One of the building blocks of this came from one of those projects that probably would have sunsetted and gone away without the library coming into being and pulling it back. So in 2021, Strata, Markle with Skillful, US Chamber, WGU, and JFF all came together and tried to do something very like this, where we said, we want to map this ecosystem and figure out who the actors are and how do they relate and how do the intermediaries relate to one another, which organizations are part of which initiatives, what would make that easier? So we started out with a project that now luckily has found a home here of trying to know who those were. We started a very basic outreach to all of the people that we knew to try to map it to do a prototype. And that's what you'll find from that database is now living in the library. But now we need more people to go, well, if they're in there, why am I not in there? And instead of saying, well, they didn't want me or they don't know, instead they need to know in our communications, in our messaging, we welcome you all, we want you all, and then them saying like, I want to be a part of this too. So I think it's about trust, it's about that maintenance, and then as people use it, hopefully it'll keep on growing. So I want to bring everybody's attention to that part of things. If you don't see your organization or you don't see an organization that you love in there, please reach out and build it up.
Great. Julie.
Sure. You know, I don't necessarily think it's a failing in the design. I think it's we do have an issue in the conditions that exist around the research in these areas. For instance, APSIA members are typically four-year institutions. They're practitioners that are building credentials, non-degree credentials, and those folks are working day to day trying to create programs that resonate with regional workforces and employers. They don't have time necessarily to produce the research that we're all really searching for. And so I think the conditions are a little challenging for the practitioners, right? I think, you know, because we're not faculty, right? We're administrators often at four-year institutions. So we don't have tenure and promotion requirements where a lot of that research is sought after and accounted for in those activities. But I think to echo Edward's point, I think intermediary organizations like us, you know, can really do a good job of helping disseminate this information to say, hey, holding this library up as an example, as a place where you can contribute with your organization, with the work that you're doing and your projects, so that folks start seeing, as Janet maybe, you know, was alluding to, a little bit of FOMO, like I want to be in that crowd. I want to have my, you know, our projects noted and being part of this larger conversation. So I think there's a really good opportunity here to maybe address some of the fundamental issues in our space around the production of research and doing more to kind of support that effort.
Great, thank you. Kenyatta.
Yeah, I mean, to the point of everyone, I think to get the wheel to efficiently turn, you've got to find energy both in the you know, contributions, but also the application. And I think I'm probably more focused on the application of it. So Holly, I'd say, I don't know if you realize this or not, but I think you set the stage for creating a new academic discipline, being a faculty member and a researcher. And I'm serious in that when we think about new terms that probably are not going to go away, but you wouldn't know where to find it at a college, like economic mobility or social capital or braided funding, right? And so I think it's something that we need to think about for how it can be applied of providing professionals new skills. How can I, Holly, create a certificate from this for some of my staff members that I'm bringing on, right? Or how do I train board members and being more steeped in this, because this is not just about being a nonprofit, it's about making sure communities are thriving. And this is a way that you can refine that content in a way that they can fully understand it. I say the other thing is an application, I'm thinking really about leadership development programs. And as they're going across and looking at different locations, sometimes when they take experiential tours, how can we use this wiki as a way in which they can refer to it to get information back and understand really what their role is in it. And then the last thing I'd say is, for policy levers out there, this hopefully will help to change some of the language and policy so that it's not so siloed and segmented, but really gets at the heart of the outcomes we want to see across the nation. So again, Holly, I don't know if you realize what you created in terms of how it's going to change a lot of different things, but I think from my perspective on the application side, that's where I'd love to drive it home of making good use of the great information that's already in the system.
Right. William, from the
So,
Marco Foundation.
Yes, so pretty much, with a panel like this, you hear a lot of the same things, and I'm just going to say yes and thumbs up to what everybody said. I think the one thing I want to highlight a little bit more is I will say local, regional, however you want to look at it. So if I'm in a particular location where I have a community college that's doing X amount of work on credentials or whatever, maybe I don't need to see, if I'm in Indiana, do I need to see what's in Colorado or Texas or whatever? If there's a way to more localize it so that folks in that area, so when you start to talk about trust, the trust also comes from the fact that it's beneficial to me in the place that I'm in, that I'm currently in. So that's what I would say there. I would say one of the challenges I mentioned earlier, that one of the great things is, and I think somebody else just mentioned a minute ago, but one of the great things is the fact that you have somebody trying to maintain all this, because this is huge. But I think that's also a challenge, because if you don't, as I said earlier, you're going to lose folks, and that trust goes away. Yeah, I'm not going to put my information in there. It just it gets outdated. They don't change it. So as I'm talking about this, all I'm saying is it's a great tool, a great resource, but the key is to make sure that we can maintain it over time and make it as locally accessible as possible. One of the things I would also say is that I'll throw out as one that I would bring up is, how do people navigate and get into it? Yes, we can market it, get it out to folks, but if I'm an employer, would I know that I haven't talked to one of the folks on this panel? Would I know that this is out there? How do I get people in the area to make it something that's part of a tool? And then do I connect to other things that are happening in the area? I'm going to use an example here in Indiana just to illustrate that. So the Indiana Chamber has built a platform called Talent Resource Navigator for employers to go to look for all the employer-related tools and resources within the state of Indiana. This would also provide a connection to that platform that would then expand what the Talent Resource Navigator has. But would they know that, or how would we be able to connect them to it? So I'm not saying it's detrimental to how this might work. I'm just saying to make sure that we're thinking about that as you go forward. Then I'll leave it at that.
Great. David?
I agree with pretty much everybody said, and I think I would think about three different things when I'm just looking at the library up front. And I agree that it has to be, first of all, it has to be faster. It has to be more trusted and more engaging and more relevant than the alternatives. Otherwise, people won't unhook from what they're doing before. I think it also needs to be tied to very strong persona work and use cases. I mean, there needs to be a section on hiring or skills development or retention. So it needs to be really broken down, because people just don't have time to sort through. And I know there are some filters on there, but I think that really leads to the big thing that I think that the library is going to need going forward is a really solid searching and filtering engine on it. Need to add filtering at the search. When I go and I search for something, I want to know, is it a blog? Is it analyst research? Is it news? Is it a white paper? When was it issued? I'd like to see an abstract on each one of those pieces. So that means every piece of data is going to have to be meta tagged and have an abstract associated with it. That way I can filter down very quickly to say, I want to see only those things that have this particular topic that are related to the things that I care about. And I think that that'll be the way that it gets used, because otherwise, there's just so much information and people are overloaded and they just don't have more than 5 minutes.
No, David, I think you're making a great point. But something that has also occurred to me that I'd love a few of you to take a stab at, as somebody who's recently gone through the college admissions process, is that and survived, came out the other side. There seems like there's a ton of information for people who want to send their kids to four-year traditional schools. But for students who might be older or looking to access information either about workforce programs, credentials, community colleges, et cetera, and that have, alignment to or pathways to jobs. There's very few places. It's not taught it's not something you generally get in US high schools, and it's not something that you really know about as a resource place. Does anyone feel like this library could be of great use to guidance counselors, to schools, to teachers, to students, to parents? Curious if anyone feels that that's a good role for it and what it would need to make that happen otherwise.
Yeah, I'll lean on David's point, which is great. I don't know if you could do it with the wiki, but I think it's having all this information aggregated in one source. If there's an ability to build curriculum and package it somewhere that's connected to this source, I think maybe, you'd have a way which you could create regional solutions, statewide solutions, national solutions from the information, to your point, David, that's relevant for the particular audience, whether it's the personas that we want to work on or work with to, improve economic mobility, but also for those who are in the economic mobility game, whether they know it or not, of packaging that information that can help them quickly pull it all in one source and hopefully empower their work.
Anyone else on the student question? How could it reach students, parents, people who are trying to advise people, individuals about the work, about the many options available? Any thoughts on that?
I just want to say that I think you're 100% right. There's almost nothing like that. There's a desperate need for, well-described ways of conveying what these tools are, what these pathways are and what they lead to. It doesn't exist. Maybe that could be a subset of this work. I don't know, but I know we need it.
Yeah. Anyone else on that? If not, we may actually take a question from the audiences. The chat has been very lively, and I think that's what we're going to go with that. It's interesting though that's something to think about for going forward, and that's one of the points of this discussion, is to identify areas that they can think about going forward. Who else might use this? And I was also thinking about employers as well. And if anyone had any thoughts in the meantime on employers' use of these resources when they're trying to hire or trying to, understand the various pathways, I'd love to hear that as well.
I can certainly jump in there quickly, since that's where a lot of our work focuses. It certainly depends on your role within an employer. So often in this space, we think about the transition from post-secondary education of some form or otherwise to work. But then you also have the learning and development and training that happens, that's led by chief learning officers and training managers, even just people in a senior operational role. So I think for a host of use cases, I love that term that I think David used. If you're an employer, we also have, and Holly and I have done some work on this together, employers who are engaging in their own credential programs and digital badging efforts. They need a resource to go to that, again, curates relevant information. So I can imagine many people at employers, depending on where they sit, who could benefit from a lot of this just as much, frankly, as the academic type of audience.
Yeah, I have to agree with Sean. I think that it's what's the job to be done? Start there. You're not going to start with badges. You're going to start with hiring. You're going to start with retention. You're going to start with engagement. You're going to, upskilling, whatever it is. And then you're going to get down to the tactical plan to do it. So you really have to start with those use cases.
Great.
Go ahead, Julie.
No, go ahead, William.
I was just going to agree. I think that it's a really, it's a challenging space, and to try and broaden the appeal of such a library to so many different possible users, you really need to be careful that you don't kind of, lose sight, right? So to have, as Dave said, to have that end goal, to know who probably would value it the most and who would use it the most, and the value of that use, as opposed to perhaps making it, we do want it to be a very, very good resource for folks. And sometimes those are challenging to navigate depending on where you are in terms of this adoption and the space. So, it's a cautionary tale of not trying to create something that's all things to all people, really.
That's great. I have two
So,
really.
Liz, let me just throw something in here because I want to tie into this if I can. So my role before I took on the role with Marco Foundation was I was the Director of Education Development for a large manufacturer, a global manufacturer. And to Sean's point, you know, we were a large company, and imagine a small and medium-sized company not knowing, they may want to create a training program, they may want to do or find out what they could create. When I was in that role, before all this happened, I didn't know where to go. And if I had a place that I could go to find out some of this information, to find out the research without having to go to multiple sites and try to pull it all together, you know, it would have made my job so much easier in that particular part of the job, right? So to Sean's point, I think, you know, if we can get it to where we can get it in employers' hands, but to show the ROI to them, the development leaders, whoever's leading that particular work, to me, it's another benefit of the work that you've pulled together so far.
Great. One of the panelists brought up something that I think is super important that we've been writing about a lot, and that is the early childhood workforce. As you guys know, the child care system in the US is really in a crisis level, and there's a desperate need for more workers. So somebody wanted to know if it could have information about both about the early childhood workforce and the family services, human services workforce areas where there's such an enormous need. Anyone have thoughts on that? No one? I'm sorry, it looked like you were nodding, Janet. No? Or is it just something to consider for future use?
It's something to consider. Like originally I was like, bring it on. There's no reason why not. That, you know, when you have a structure of data, you could plug it in, and we all know that it's part of it. And then immediately I started arguing with myself because, you know, even with 9 people, I can have multiple conversations going on in my head of, you know, it's a broader question. With the use cases, for whom is this meant to be useful? So are we diluting our efforts if we expand it that far? But at the same time, if there is a community of researchers looking at that, there is a community of funders and actors and intermediaries, and people are trying to, we're all trying to think of this as a lifelong path, then again, I come back to why wouldn't we? Anybody want to join in the argument in my head?
I think that point, Janet, goes back to David's point about the meta tags and the search functions. So yeah, you could contain it well as long as it's organized in a way that connects to some of the overarching pillars of this tool.
Just really quickly on the early childhood care piece. I mean, obviously, helping roles like that where you're not being paid a living wage, it's so frustrating. It's such a terrible crisis that I think people kind of throw up their hands and ignore it. Yet, I think there are little tiny signs of work that might make a dent. In Illinois, they're trying, sorry, Liz, to do stackable credentials for early childhood educators. And for me, like an issue like that, it would be really helpful to see something that isn't hopeless, where there's something to build on.
Yeah, we are also looking for solutions constantly in our journalism. Edward?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that a lot of our community college and technical college members have those type programs, and they could be a great source for information about those programs. Some obviously more successful than others, but there's some great models out there for consideration.
That would be great. We have a question too, that's interesting, that they're seeing that many of the challenges that the US are facing are also common internationally. So there's questions about how this could be used, you know, not just in the US, because some of the lessons and the things that we're talking about here in the resources are probably applicable to what's happening internationally. I don't know if that's one you'd like to answer, Holly, or if anybody else has thoughts on that.
Well, I can pipe up. If you can just hear my voice, everybody. One of the advantages to doing this work is I've been able to sit on some committees comprised of mostly international folks where I honestly didn't know a lot about the developments. And so I've been doing a pretty fast study on the development of policy, especially in many nations where developments are nationalized, where they are not in the US. And it's really interesting to watch, particularly on the development of micro-credentialing. And we have a lot to learn from other nations. I actually think many of them are farther ahead than the US, We have a lot of lessons to learn, but at the same time, in meetings, folks are asking me and those of us from the US, they don't understand the US system. Where can they go to understand the decentralized and one of them said, quote, things are such a mess in the US. Well, I had a hard time arguing with that because I really didn't know how to explain it any better than we have a very decentralized system. There are many advantages to it, but there are some disadvantages too in a very rapidly changing economic and social situation. So one of the reasons why we have one of the 12 building blocks is an international door, because we wanted to have a place where we could describe some of the policies and some of the initiatives and alliances, particularly alliances that are made up of representatives from many, many countries, including the US, so that folks, particularly researchers and those that I call the highway builders that are trying to improve our system, could really have access to information. So we need to do much better at that. And I see some of our international colleagues are on this call. I'm so happy about that. But we need to do a lot more to be able to share information globally. The companies, many of them, the employers are global. That's the function, that's the world they function in, and we all need to function in the globe.
Well,
Can I add to that real quickly? Because when I was, one of my early career things that I did at IBM was I developed IBM's first cloud-based embedded learning solution. And it was very US centric when I started developing it. But then I went around the globe and started asking people what they thought of it. And I went to Singapore, India, to different places in Europe. And Singapore was where the ideas came for the solution. It was completely radically different than what, the United States one was everything but the kitchen sink in this thing, right? And then Singapore is like, no, we need to pare it down to X, and we need X number of languages and all these other things. So I think really you're absolutely right, Holly, getting that regional perspective and the cross-pollination that you get from ideas from people in different industries and different parts of the world is tremendous.
That's great. I think that's going to go on Holly's to-do list, which is probably going to be incredibly long after this webinar. There's also a lot of questions about how much digital credentialing will be a part of all of this. So Holly, you may want to add that as well, and others who are listening. And it seems like there have been a lot of good points made and in this fascinating discussion, and also some concerns about how will we find out when the wiki is updated? Is there going to be, a way of learning or being able to log on and know that there's a new entry added? Is that to-do list, or is there an actual answer to that one yet?
Well, at the end, I was going to go through the what's next and touch on a few points. These so many great suggestions and insights have been raised already by the panel. And we're building the plane as we are flying it. That is the reality. And we're going to have to bring a lot of folks in to consult with us about how we best shape this. One of you already said we can't do everything, but we can do better than what we have. And the purpose of the prototype was to share the vision with some real content in there, because when we talked about the vision a couple of years ago, folks didn't really understand what we were talking about. So I sort of blithely said, oh, well, we'll just build a prototype then. And so we called on many folks to work with us to build a prototype so everyone could get a better sense of what it could look like. And as Janet already indicated, another group was already working on something similar. So many bright minds are moving toward, we have to share information more effectively and find a way to not act so decentralized, particularly around information. So in digital credentialing, micro-credentialing, incremental credentials are a huge topic that everyone's dealing with, and that's a big global concern. And so you're going to see that a lot of the initiatives that we're highlighting are really dealing with the micro-credential developments or degree pathways or bridges from non-credit to credit, all the things that really are related to digital credentialing and badging. And there's definitions for all the badge backpacks and badge this and all the different names that people are using. I can't even think of all the list of them, but we're thinking it's helpful for everyone to know what the language of the ecosystem is.
Absolutely. And yeah, the language, the library is going to have features that will kind of sort of help us collect like terms or different ways of curating it all together. And I'm also hoping that there'll be some translations available. So those of us who are writing about it, talking about it publicly, talking about it with students can make it really clear, because these are all of the things that are going to help improve education and options for students and for employers. So I think this has been really a great early look at it. Holly, I'm going to just turn to you again if there's any next steps that you want to finish with before we wrap up here. And a big thanks to all of the panelists for your insight and your thoughts and your the further questions that you've added to this thinking about how we're going to how this moves forward next.
Great. Oh, thank you so much. And I would like to cover share with you what we think is coming next. But I just want to respond to one point that you raised, Liz, and that is we had a great copy editor who said this has to be readable for the age 14 approximately. We have to make this understandable, no abbreviations, or at least if there's an abbreviation, say what it means and then explain it, because a lot of folks don't understand what these concepts are. So we have really made an effort, and we will continue to make this information understandable. And if everyone else wants to put their abbreviations back in, great. But we're going to try to follow some guidance about trying to keep this information understandable to folks. So here's what we think is going to come next. First, we're going to go through all the chat room comments, and thank you so much for all of this robustness. It's so wonderful. We're going to post today's discussion at YouTube, and we'll let you all know where to find the link if you want to share it with your colleagues. We're going to send you a reaction form to ask for your feedback. We would love to hear from you via emails or calls after you've had a chance to check out the library. I know some of you already have. We hope you'll go back and keep looking at it. And keep remembering, this is a prototype. I don't want to be apologetic or defensive. It is a prototype, and we're really going to be looking to improve it going forward. So in 2023, we plan to hire a librarian to take over curation and oversee the improvements, because we think that this is really, really important. One of our critics, as we were developing this, said, is this going to turn into, I hate to say this, a Google search where everybody gets to market their wares? And I said, no, we're going to curate it. We're going to have some rules of the game. Not everything is going to be able to be at the library. If something is old, we're going to move it into the archive. We're not just going to keep it there, but we feel like this is going to be important to keep with the spirit of what is the best current information. So we're going to figure out how to do that. And we've all sort of agreed that librarians are truly expert at that, more than a lot of us are. So we're going to be finding a librarian to help us with this. We're going to start adding more content, literally, as we speak, and we welcome suggestions for more topics. What you see was just the topics we were able to come up with, and then we had to call time. So it was never meant to be totally comprehensive. So we're going to be working on that. If you think that we need corrections, of course, submit one of the forms that you saw in the movie trailer. The form is going to be available at the website, and so we would love to make corrections. We also know, and I'm thinking about what Janet said, that many of the intermediaries and alliances, for example, are not included in the prototype, and we want to start adding those as soon as we can. We're going to be talking about the library at a number of upcoming conferences in the next year. And if you'd like to inform your networks about this resource, let us know. We'd welcome the opportunity to work with you and to get the word out. We're also going to be looking for partners and sponsors, and you'll see there's a little section about what we think that might be, and our library advisory group is going to be advising us about that. But if any of you want to partner or sponsor in some way with the library, of course, we'd love to talk with you about that. And the last thing I want to do, which should never be last on the list, but it is really a huge thank you to the many folks who have been helping with advice and counsel along the way to this prototype, especially the members of our library advisory board who reminded us at the beginning. They said to me, listen, if you're building a static website, don't waste your time. It's either a wiki or nothing. And we heard that over and over. So our new motto is, it's a wiki or nothing. Thank you to the folks who provided content for the prototype, the writers and the researchers. Many are on the call. I won't call you out, but you know who you are. Thanks to our amazing copy editor. Thank you to the website developer Cure. Thank you to the Credential As You Go team. Thank you to this amazing panel today and Liz Willen, just incredible insights. And really thank you to everyone joining in the Zoom room, including many of the wonderful colleagues outside the US. So we're so glad you could join us. It's probably nighttime or maybe after midnight for some of you. So super glad that you've been on the call. So unless there's any final questions, Liz, that you want to raise, I think we should sign off early and give everybody back a little time in their days. And we want to wish you all a really happy holidays. And I don't know exactly how we'll let you know every time there's new content. We're just hoping that you will come to the library on a regular basis and you'll see that it's going to be continually updated. So we're looking for ideas. So Liz, do you want to add any more?
No, it's a wiki or nothing, as you said, Holly. I'm just going to urge everyone, since it just became live, to spend some time on it. It's really terrific. I mean, there's so many things that lead to other things. It's intuitive. There's sections for journalists, for researchers, whatever. I've already sent it around to all of my staff, and we're all just really glad to see this in one place and know that it's going to be updated. So thank you for all the work on this and for allowing me to be part of your discussion, everyone, and have a great holiday.
Signing off. Bye-bye.